I want to welcome the members and staff, our guests, presenters to the May meeting of the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York. Thank you all for being here. I gather we have a quorum so we can have a meeting. I have gotten word of a clandestine group, people who are talking about reversing the table. Moving those from that side to this side and those from this side to that side. That there's an intended coup afoot here. And I just want to say to those unknown people that coup is doomed to fail.
Just like the Rangers feel.
Yes.
It was a tough blow.
I know you believe in democracy.
I'm about to demonstrate that. The first item on the agenda is the minutes. I confess to having returned last night very late from travel, and the minutes were in my mailbox, and I have not had a chance to read them, so I'm going to ask for your approval, and I shall abstain. Are there any suggested revisions for the minutes? Paul?
Yes, on page 13,
Yes.
in the discussion regarding the Jewish seminary, the paragraph beginning Ms. Snyder, it says, Mr. Ellis stated that the seminary appears to utilize private gifts and grants to achieve stability over the years, noting that they account for over 50% of revenue. My comment there was really more to note whether that was a point of concern, and not to sort of note that was a point of stability. I have some alternative language, or someone could go back to the videotape. Should I?
Why don't you give it to us? Yeah, go right ahead.
As best I can remember, although one could confirm on the tape, I would say Mr. Ellis noted that private gifts and grants had been used to achieve stability over the years, accounting for over 50% of revenue. No, I'm sorry. Mr. Ellis noted that private gifts and grants account for over 50% of revenue. He asked whether that was a concern and whether that level had been stable over the years, including during the 2008-2000 time frame. I don't remember who responded, but the response was that those funding sources had been stable and that was not regarded as a concern. The reason I make that change is because it sort of, as drafted, it gives the opposite implication of what I was.
I understand what you said. I couldn't write it down fast enough. I'll leave that for Mike to get straight. The two of you will get together. Did everybody understand Paul's revision proposed? All right. Having heard Paul's suggested revision, are there any other revisions for the minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes?
I'll move approval as amended.
As amended. I'm sorry. Of course. Is there a second? Thank you, Chairman Johnson. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. I'm sorry. I have to abstain. Okay. We move to the second agenda item, the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Finance Committee met yesterday afternoon in actually video conference in Albany, and we met in the New York City office. Board member John Gardner also appeared. We addressed two financings. One was the White Plains Hospital TELP financing. The other was the state sales tax revenue bond program and state personal income tax revenue bond. They were a small offering of $3 billion, and so we actually had the pleasure, Adrian set up to have Tom Wood from the Division's budget actually make a very, very detailed and very well thought out presentation relating to the decision to have these bonds presented to the board today. I'm going to let Portia sort of give the sort of overview of that, but in substance, what Tom basically advised was that there were two things going on. One, that they were really consolidating their program and letting DASNY really sort of take the lead with these bonds. And two, they were really looking to sort of, I'm not going to say accelerate, but sort of quicken the process from the state's perspective. I think that was a sort of an overview, but Portia, please, because it was very, very detailed. I think John would agree that it was a very detailed presentation, and we really greatly appreciate it. And thank you to Adrian for setting it up.
Thank you. Obviously, my colleague Tom Wood for doing all the talking.
All right.
Absolutely, Jerry. I think your summary really hit on the highlights of the issues that Tom Wood from Budget had addressed. He basically talked about the factors that are driving these larger bond authorizations. Jerry had indicated, he talked about the consolidation of state-supported debt issuers. In the beginning of the issuance under Pitt in 2003, there were 5 state-supported issuers. The Division of Budget is now using basically 3 state-supported debt issuers, ourselves, ESD, and Thruway. Although as of late, they really have not been using Thruway very much, I would say, in the last probably 2, maybe to 3 years. I think that's also sort of reflected in the authorization for the state-supported debt issuers for sales tax, which was enacted in 2013. There were only 3 statutory state-supported debt issuers: DASNY, ESD, and Thruway authority. So he talked about that kind of consolidation. He also talked about the consolidation of the state's credits from really a number of different kinds of state-supported credits that were really set up by kind of purpose, various education purposes like SUNY, various mental health, those kinds of bonds that we actually used to issue on a separate basis, SUNY educational bonds, mental health bonds. And he talked about the consolidation into really 3 primary financing vehicles, one being Pitt, the second being sales tax, and the third being general obligation bonds. We, as well as the other state-supported debt issuers, can issue Pitt and sales tax. The general obligation bonds are issued through the Comptroller's office. So he talked about that type of consolidation, and as Jerry had noted, really the acceleration of the authorization process. I think the thing he used is that, typically in the past, Budget had sought authorizations in a sort of just-in-time basis. And at this point, given the number of approvals that are needed, and given the fact that, the state's capital plan and issuance process really is established after the budget is passed as a result of what is passed in the budget, in order to ensure sort of a smooth process in terms of being able to get to market. The Budget was seeking larger authorizations and earlier in the fiscal year. So those are the factors that he talked about as far as the things that were driving the larger bond authorizations. He talked about debt affordability. And one of the things that we can do is perhaps send to the board with some of the charts and graphs that Budget puts together on the issue of debt affordability. But he basically talked about different kinds of metrics, particular ones that rating agencies use that look at metrics as far as debt outstanding is concerned and debt service costs. And he talked about the trends in those metrics over time. And he talked about how that basically, informs the state's thinking and process as they look to issue bonds that are part of the state's capital plan, because obviously they're issuing bonds and they're undertaking pay-as-you-go capital as well. And he also, then talked about the state's ratings. I mean, as you all know, the Pitt program is rated AAA by Standard & Poor's and AA1 by Moody's, AA+ by Fitch. He also talked about the state's own rating, though, which is, at this point in time, it's AA1 by Moody's, AA+, AA+ by Standard & Poor's and Fitch. It's basically one notch below the highest rating possible that the rating agencies provide. This is the highest rating that the state has had since 1972. And so, I think he was able to, provide information sort of in those sort of three buckets as far as sort of the process they were looking at, the measures that they undertake and sort of the discipline that they try to impose themselves, looking at the metrics internally as well as those that the rating agencies are looking at, and then, reminding us of, where they have come out as far as not just the rating on the PIT and sales tax programs, but really the rating on the state itself. And I think that's sort of the high-level summary, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry to have missed.
It was really insightful, Sandra. I thought it was a very detailed presentation. Some of the other point was with the percent of personal income. He said in the last from 2011 to 16, the debt percentage had been reduced. Also, he noted. He also, like Portia said, they were the best financial. In their view, they were in the best financial condition the state's been in 50 years. Is the comments of the budget made. Anyway, it was again I thought it was informative and certainly helpful to understanding what their process is.
At some point in the future, Jerry, do you suggest that we consider having somebody like Mr.
Oh,
Wood
most
in
definitely.
the board meeting?
Most definitely.
All right.
I was
It's
about
very,
to say
very
the same
helpful.
thing, yes.
Yeah, I think that if Adrian can arrange it, I mean, he
Yes.
just sort of in his
Thank you.
domain there.
If you would. John?
If this has already been mentioned before I got here, one other point is that there has been a decision to consolidate more of the debt issuances with DASNY. And so we are seeing some transportation and environmental related debt that we haven't seen before. That's part of a decision, and it shows faith and confidence in DASNY, and that was one of the big takeaways.
Are there other questions for the folk who were there? Gerard, Portia, John?
But I would second your recommendation about the board seeing at least, it could be a shorter version perhaps, but whatever is appropriate.
I'll get with the president. We'll work it out with regard to timing. When should we do it? Okay. But I promise that we will do it. Sounds like it was a great presentation. I'm sorry I missed it.
You too.
Thank you for your report, Chair.
And thank you again, Adrian, for
And Adrian, thank you for making Mr. Woods available to us. We move now to item 3 on the agenda, the adoption of financing documents, and I turn the meeting over to the President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Behind tab 3 is the Cerebral Palsy Affiliate Credit Summary Update with co-bond counsel Christopher Retzel, Esquire, of Squire Patton Boggs, and Douglas Seaton, Esquire, of D. Seaton and Associates, PAPC, and Steve Hosier presenting.
Gentlemen, good morning.
The proposed financing is a private placement to fund the acquisition and renovation of a condominium unit in Manhattan, which will be United Cerebral Palsy Associations of New York State new headquarters, and also to fund the acquisition of a 4-story building in Brooklyn, which provides residential services. Prior to Kristen Douglas presenting the documents, I'd like to mention a couple of the recent developments described in the credit summary update provided to the members. Staff presented the credit at the March 8th board meeting and to PACB on March 15th. The borrower had not yet selected a purchaser. The assumption at the time was that the bonds would have a 30-year final maturity. The borrower has since selected Oppenheimer Funds to be the purchaser. Oppenheimer offered the borrower a fixed rate of interest with a final maturity in 2050. Therefore, staff plans to request an amendment to the PACB resolution allowing a 33-year bond issue at the next PACB meeting. Kristen Douglas will now present the documents, including the security provisions. However, I wanted to point out that in addition to the security described to the board in March, There will also be a debt service reserve fund acceptable to the purchaser.
Thank you, Steve.
Good morning.
Gentlemen.
Before you for consideration is the adoption of 4 series resolutions authorizing individually and in the aggregate the issuance of up to $37 million of Cerebral Palsy Affiliates Program, United Cerebral Palsy Associations of New York State, Inc. Revenue Bonds, Series 2017. The Series 2017 bonds will be issued under the Authority Cerebral Palsy Affiliates Program Revenue Bond Resolution that was adopted in October of 2013. As permitted by the DASNY Act, the general resolution authorizes the issuance of revenue bonds in one or more series to finance or refinance property for United Cerebral Palsy Associations of New York State, Inc. and its not-for-profit members. The Series 2017 bonds are proposed to be issued for the benefit of UCP NYS, which is the only affiliate involved in the proposed transaction. The bonds are proposed to be issued to finance a condominium unit, which will contain administrative facilities, and a building containing residential facilities, to fund the debt service reserve fund to its requirement, and to pay cost of issuance. In order to provide flexibility with respect to structure and timing, you are being asked to authorize the issuance of tax-exempt and taxable bonds, or a combination thereof, in one or more series and at one or more times. It is currently expected that the Series 2017 bonds will be privately placed by Gates Capital Corporation pursuant to a bond placement agreement, with Oppenheimer Funds expected to be the private purchaser. The institution's current expectation, Steve just described, is that the bonds will be issued as unenhanced fixed-rate bonds. However, the series resolutions do permit bonds to be issued in other configurations than are currently contemplated. The series resolutions authorize officers to make all of the determinations described in our board letter, as well as the execution of all documents, do all other things necessary to complete the transaction. The series resolutions establish a debt service reserve fund that will be funded in accordance with the purchaser's requirements. And in accordance with the authority's guidelines, the series resolutions also contain restrictions on the ownership and transfer of the bonds to qualified institutional buyers.
In reference to the loan agreements, the authority and the institution will execute a loan agreement in connection with each issuance of the bonds. The institution's obligation to make payments under each loan agreement will be a general obligation. Each loan agreement will obligate the institution to make payments in amounts and at times sufficient to pay debt service and to provide for the payment of the purchase price of the bonds. As security for the institution's obligations under each loan agreement, the institution will grant the authority as security interest in certain of its revenues, including its public funds, payable to it in an amount equal to the maximum annual debt service on the bonds, subject to any prior pledges. In order to provide additional security, the authority expects to enter into standby intercept agreements so that upon an event of default under a loan agreement, the authority will have the right to intercept funds payable by any participating state or local agency or social services district, otherwise payable to the institution. The institution will enter into a bond purchase and continuing covenants agreement or similar agreement with the purchaser, a default under which will constitute a default under each loan agreement. The institution is also expected to grant a mortgage to the authority on the mortgage property acceptable to the purchaser, expected to consist of the properties being financed by the issuance of the bonds, which will secure its obligations under the loan agreement. It is expected that the authority's rights under any loan agreement and the mortgage, with the exception of certain reserved rights, will be assigned to the trustee, who will exercise remedies under each loan agreement and the mortgage at the discretion of the purchaser. In addition, the transaction documents will also contain certain financial covenants required by the purchaser. Thank you.
Thank you both. Are there questions for Chris or Steve? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you, Charles. Second? Farrell, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
Behind tab 4 is the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Program / Sales Tax Revenue Bond Program. Single approval credit summary with co-bond counsel Howard I. Berman, Esquire, of Hawkins, Delafield, and Robert James Esquire, and Charles Holly Esquire of Golden Holly James LLP, and Portia Lee presented.
Charles, you're welcome to join us at the table.
I think they are quite capable of handling it. Since there are any questions, I'll
Wait a minute, is that being put up for
we're
vote?
in good shape. I can heckle better back here, so that's fine. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. Behind tab 4 is the staff report for the sales tax revenue bond program and the personal income tax revenue bond program. The board is being asked to authorize the use of 2 alternate state-supported debt programs for refunding and to fund various new money needs. The 2 programs are the state sales tax revenue bond program and the personal income tax revenue bond program. The mechanics of the 2 programs are very similar, with the major difference being the stream of revenues that secure the bonds, either the sales tax revenues or the personal income tax revenues. The board is being asked to authorize the issuance of multiple series of tax-exempt and taxable fixed and or variable rate bonds issued at 1 or more times with a term of 30 years to be sold on either a competitive or negotiated basis or a combination of both. The proposed bonds can be issued under either program or through both programs, with the combined issuance not to exceed $3 billion. The term of the refunding bonds will not exceed the term of the bonds to be refunded, considered in the aggregate. As we noted last month, we've asked for flexibility previously to issue these bonds, this kind of authorization under either one program or the other. And as we did last month, we're asking for that flexibility, but we're also asking for the flexibility to issue under both programs. But again, under any circumstance, the amount that we would issue would not exceed $3 billion. As to what our expectation is under this $3 billion refunding and new money authorization, together with the $2 billion new money authorization in April, we expect that the refunding is going to take place under the PIT program, roughly $2 billion. We've got $1.8 billion in refunding candidates. And then we expect that of the remaining roughly $3 billion in new money authorization, that one new money deal will take place under the PIT program, and one new money deal will be undertaken pursuant to the sales tax program. So basically 3 transactions, 1 PIT new money, 1 sales tax new money, and 1 PIT refunding, which is pretty consistent with what we have done over recent years. Last year, DASNY issued approximately $3 billion in debt on behalf of the state under these 2 programs. In 2015, we issued about $4.7 billion under those programs, although there was also a transportation refunding that we did, which is why that number is higher, a little bit higher than it was in 2016. I'd note that the state's budget calls for new money debt issuance of approximately $7 billion, with $6 billion to take place through the PIT of the sales tax program. This transaction qualifies as a single approval because it's a new money, contains a new money component, and this transaction is one of the authority's public programs, which is already in the authority's portfolio, for which the bonds are issued pursuant to a supplemental resolution and a previously adopted general resolution. Just to talk a little bit about the components of the financing. On the refunding side, we're looking to refund bonds that are issued under various programs, including the PIT program, state service contract program, the mental health program, and other state-supported debt programs. As I mentioned, we've got $1.8 billion of refunding candidates. The vast majority are bonds that were issued by DASNY. About $1.5 billion of the candidates were issued through DASNY. A little bit more than $300 million were issued through the Thruway Authority or the Environmental Facilities Corporation. All the refunding candidates meet DOB's refunding criteria. And again, the final maturity of the refunding bonds will not exceed the maturity of the bonds to be refunded, considered in the aggregate. With respect to savings, based on current market conditions, we're looking at gross debt service savings of approximately $172.8 million and net present value savings of $165.8 million. The net present value benefit translates into about 10.2% of the bonds to be refunded. On the new money side, the state is looking to fund a variety of capital projects under a number of programs, including programs for the mental health agencies. So the Office of Mental Health, Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services for various state and voluntary facilities. We'll also be undertaking and funding certain capital projects for OMH voluntary agencies that also have the benefit of low-income housing tax credits. There are various capital projects under a transportation program called CHIPS, the Consolidated Local Street and Highway Improvement Program, and other transportation initiatives under the New York Works Transportation Infrastructure Program. There are a number of other educational services that we will be funding, including Excel, KeyCap, library facility, and longitudinal data system. Regarding security, if the bonds are issued under the sales tax program, the bonds will be paid by semi-annual payments pursuant to the financing agreement between the state and DASNY. The bonds will be secured by a set-aside of 1 cent of the state's 4% sales tax to be collected pursuant to statute and deposited into the sales tax revenue bond fund. Debt service coverage under the sales tax program is 5 times. If the bonds will be to be issued under the personal income tax program, the PIP program, the bonds will be paid pursuant to by semi-annual payments made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the state. And in this case, the bonds would be secured by a set-aside of 25% of personal income tax revenues collected pursuant to statute and deposited into the revenue bond tax fund. Current debt service coverage for all outstanding PIP bonds, that's really us and all the other state-supported debt issuers that have issued PIP bonds, is 3.5 times. As you know, the ratings on these bonds are AA1, AAA, and AA+ by Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, respectively.
Thank you, Portia. Before we hear from the lawyers at the table, are there questions for Portia on this transaction?
What is the longitudinal data system?
Is it a north-south computer?
Sounds fascinating.
So state educational agencies apply for grants to assist them in using data in statewide longitudinal data systems to inform their efforts to improve education in critical areas.
That clear enough?
Perfectly clear.
Portia, I have a question. You've been kind enough to explain this to me in the past, but for the record here, in the first paragraph under new issue details, there's a sentence that reads, the final maturity of the refunding bonds will not exceed the final maturity of the bonds being refunded, considered in the aggregate.
So to the extent that we have a number of refunding candidates,
Yes.
each with different maturities,
Yes.
the refunding bonds will not exceed the maturity of the bonds to be refunded considered in the aggregate, meaning when you look at the whole pool of them and you look at the final maturity, the latest final maturity, the refunding bonds won't go past that latest final maturity.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen.
One more question. Couple. You mentioned before that the tax revenue bonds trade just slightly. Sales tax revenue bonds trade slightly better than the PID bonds. Is that still the case, and does that at all influence which bonds get issued by the state?
That is still the case. I think in general, the sales tax bonds tend to price better than the PIT bonds just based on their scarcity value, because there's so much more in PIT bonds that have been issued and are in the market. Having said that, the amount of the differential probably changes at different times in the market. I think that the decision as to go from one issue into one program and the other has a lot to do with timing. in terms of how many bonds are currently in the market. You know, the benefit of having two vehicles to sort of alternate between is to be able to issue at various times so that there aren't too many of one type of bond in the market, either personal income tax or sales tax. So I think it's really kind of a sequencing question.
Okay.
Portia, was there discussion yesterday in the Finance Committee meeting of the revenue projections for the state going forward for personal income tax revenues and sales tax revenues?
It was not forward-going projections, no.
Does the state make those projections, Adrian? Are you? I know this is not your expertise. Okay, all right, fair enough. Then if we do have the presentation here, it would be great to just get a sense of where New York is with regard to revenue projections from both sales tax and personal income tax.
And I think, you know, the state undertakes a quarterly process of updating its annual information statement. And I think a large part of that is really to try to provide investors with that type of information, so that they're aware, you know, in pretty real time, you know, what those kinds of numbers are looking like.
Okay.
Because it would be interesting to know on the sales tax side what the changing marketplace is causing. And there was a very interesting article in the Times Union this week about the impact on Albany County of sales tax collections.
Okay.
And their controller there is quite concerned on a forward-looking basis as to what their share of the sales tax is going to be.
Fair enough.
Because of,
well, I mean, I just think having some sense of what the state knows or believes about future revenues would give us some comfort.
I mean, just in the North Country alone, there are 3 major retailers that are going to close up in the next 12 months.
Wow.
I mean, that's all big sales tax money.
Yeah, okay. Portia, thank you very much. Now, are there other questions? Hearing none. Gentlemen, please.
Okay, I'm Howard Berkman from Hawkinsdale, Field and Wood. I've been here before, as you know, including on these programs. Portia did such a good job. She covered not only the business side of it, but the legal side as well. So I will not try and repeat everything she said, but just highlight a couple of items. You're being asked to consider 2 supplemental resolutions. One would be under the PIT program, the other would be under the sales tax program. And as Portia noted, the 2 together, in terms of issuance of bonds, cannot exceed $3 billion. So that if $1 billion is issued under PIT, then you can still issue $3 billion on the sales tax. You'd only be able to issue $2 billion. So we can't sneak away and issue $6 billion worth of bonds. You're limited to $3 billion worth of bonds. The PIT resolution has been around for a long time and has a structure where 25% of the personal income tax is deposited to a fund held in the state, and that's the money that's going to be used for debt service on the PIT bond, all the PIT bonds, subject to appropriation. These are classic state-supported debt, subject to appropriation. Similarly, the sales tax has its own fund where 1 cent of the 4 cent sales tax goes into that fund, and that's used for debt service, subject to appropriation. The contract between the state and the authority to pay that over is a financing agreement that's signed by Budget and DASNY. So we have those for both of those programs. So as I said, the PIT program was around for a lot longer. A few years ago, the state decided, and you agreed, that there should be an alternate method of issuing these bonds that also has a very strong security backing. And so they asked you to adopt a sales tax general resolution, which you did. And it's intended to be, and it succeeds in being very, very similar to the PIT general resolution, other than the obvious security differences. And so it was always meant to be the same, and in the minds of the investors, they'll know that it's like the program, they're familiar with it, et cetera. The supplemental resolutions that Robert's going to talk about authorize the uses of the bonds and what is expected to be done. I think that's really it of the general resolution. Even the lower documents than the bond resolution, like the supplemental resolution, as between PID and sales tax, are supposed to be extremely similar, almost identical. So with that introduction as to the supplemental resolutions, I'll turn it over to Robert James, our co-bond counsel on this transaction.
Good morning. I'm Robert James with Golden Holly James, and before I get started, I want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be here. We don't take it lightly to be granted this opportunity to serve the Dormitory Authority. In particular, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, we appreciate your confidence in us. Look forward to working with Howard in the future. Portia was a great opening act and really stole nearly all of our thunder. And so I'll just give a couple of quick highlights on the supplemental resolutions. These supplemental resolutions are mirror images of one another. They function and perform in very similar ways. As was mentioned, each supplemental resolution allows the issuance of an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3 billion. However, they work in concert so that you can't go out and issue $6 billion. Each supplemental resolution further provides that all or a portion of the respective series of sales tax or PIT bonds authorized may be sold at public or private sale on a negotiated basis or through competitive bidding, and may be consolidated in a single series with other sales tax and PIT bonds that are authorized under that respective resolution. The resolutions each delegate various officers of the authority with certain powers, including to designate series and subseries and to determine the principal amount to be issued as taxable or tax exempt, the dates of maturity, provided, as Portia mentioned, that refunding bonds will not exceed the maturities of the refunded bonds considered in the aggregate. The officers of the authority are delegated the power to fix the interest rates or to determine whether the interest rates will be fixed or variable. The purchase price to be with a certain interest rate cap on the fixed rates or variable rates, and taxable versus tax exempt. The purchase price to be paid if it's sold if the bonds are sold on a negotiated basis, provided that it's not less than 90% of the principal amount of any bonds issued, and various other powers that are necessary and proper for the issuance of the bonds. And with that, I'll wrap up and see if there's any other questions.
Are there any questions? All right. Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Gerard, thank you very much. Second, Paul, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? No? So the motion carries unanimously. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Robert, it's good to have you and Charles on this transaction with Howard, and I want to thank you for what you're doing. All three of you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Behind tab 5 is the White Plains Hospital and Medical Center TELP transaction with Portia Lee presenting.
Thank you very much. The staff report behind tab 5 is for the TELP financing for the White Plains Hospital and Medical Center in an amount not to exceed $18.2 million. As you know, it's the current policy of the Public Authorities Control Board that TELP financings which exceed $10 million in a 12-month period be brought before the board and PACB for their approval. There's the attached equipment list, which lists out various types of radiology, oncology, surgical services, and other types of equipment. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Portia. Does anyone have questions about this TELP transaction? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it? Charlie, thank you. Is there a second? Sandra, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We will now go to the management reports, beginning with the report of the president.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Again, we have a few items that we want to discuss, including some incredible work that our DASNY construction group is doing on the CUNY campuses to provide more than $250 million in energy efficiency upgrades. But before we get into that, I'd like to highlight again one of the things that we keep talking and I want to reaffirm to the board that we're working on is identifying adjacent opportunities for DASNY as we think about our financial capability and our construction capability. So on Tuesday, April 18th, a team consisting of Portia Lee, Paul Koopman, Dan Petroff, Tim McGrath, Sandy Degler, and I met with senior members of Syracuse University's leadership team, discuss how DASNY could help them realize the vision of their campus framework plan. Now, we have not had a relationship with Syracuse University, which is perhaps one of the most important higher education institutions in the state and certainly very critical to the center of the state's the central New York economy. And so recognizing that and seeing that there's leadership change there, we went there and knocked on their doors and talked about our capability, how we would like to work with them, and recognizing that with this very ambitious agenda that they have in terms of their forward capital project budget, they've got a lot of deferred maintenance. All of these universities have deferred maintenance. And what we're really trying to present is, are there opportunities for us to be a point of intersection and really be an extension of their facilities management, to do some project management, to do some procurement. So it was a great, incredible discussion in terms of how we could figure out how to work together. We talked about the residence hall work that we have done for the SUNY campuses. We talked about the work that we've done for SUNY Upstate, which is not too far from them. And so this is the beginning of a discussion. And this is the beginning of many discussions that we are starting to have, recognizing some of the challenges that private universities are also having and how central they are to many parts of New York State's economy, particularly when you get outside of New York City, Long Island, and Westchester. So I expect to see the president of Syracuse University next week. So someone was kind enough to arrange a meeting for us to continue this discussion, and we'll revisit them. But again, this is a first of many efforts on our part to introduce both our finance and in particular our construction capability to many of these institutions.
Mr. President? This is only tangential to this topic, but has there been any internal analysis about the Excelsior program and what the impact is going to be across the board in terms of the borrowers that rely on DASNY?
We've not done an analysis because we don't execute the program, but we understand that a lot of analysis has been done across the state and that there is a very identifiable segment of students who are recognized as not necessarily going to some of the private universities. Now, there may in fact be a tail over time that gets that, but we don't have comprehensive data. But we have heard from some of the private universities and they're concerned.
Clarkson University.
The Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities has been fairly outspoken about this, about their concerns. And I'm sure you've heard from them.
Our effort in terms of communicating with them has been the entryway to communicating with the private colleges and universities, because we firmly believe that there's an incredible opportunity for us to figure out the delivery of some kind of project management or some type of advisory effort from our construction business. And so before we could talk about that, that was the first thing that came up. And so we're sensitive to that. And we told them that we're very important partners to that whole network of institutions that are very critical to the state's economy. So,
Clarkson University in Northern New York Now it's last week, the class for next fall is 10% lower than they had anticipated, and it's all in the demographic of competition for the Excelsior contract. It's all in that demographic. New York residents, family income of less than $100,000 who are willing to be full-time students. It's a major impact. It's going to be 30 layoffs. It's so that I believe that they're talking in the range of 30 layoffs in Potsdam at Clarkson College. It's a significant hit.
Utica College, I think, has made similar public statements too about applicants and tying it to that. Did this come up in the meeting with the Syracuse folks? They didn't raise it as a concern that they have.
No, they did not.
It may be the smaller schools.
Right, I think it's a different level probably.
It's going to be, and Syracuse is not as much of an engineering school. I mean, the first wave of impacts appear to be in the engineering schools, and rather than more the broader-based education institutions or liberal arts colleges.
If you did construction work for a private university, does WIC supply work?
Interesting question. It's not a public work.
I don't know. I mean, if it did, you're clearly going nowhere. But if it doesn't, we can play in that arena, I would guess.
That's correct. We think our preliminary research is that options are on the table with privates because it's not a public works project.
I mean, we recognize that there's an enormous amount of pressure on these institutions. And a lot of that pressure with respect to every marginal dollar that is allocated, we hear this every time we go out, needs to go to the core of their mission. And when you look at that and you look at the fact that in order to be competitive, they have to have best-in-class residence halls. The students and the parents are demanding even more. We see that. In addition, some of the top infrastructure available, but they've got a lot of deferred capital costs that has to be managed. And alumni, you don't raise dollars to really do deferred maintenance. That's a very tough opportunity. So we don't know if we're going to be successful. We think that there is an opportunity for us to really position ourselves and work with some of these institutions. A number of them come through us for financing, and so we're looking at a lot of different options.
I think Paul's point in part was, are we factoring in a potential change, be it in that particular program or in any number of federal changes in the law that affect our credits? I mean, ideologically, issues aside, are we looking both in the past and on ongoing basis how that might affect these institutions, or might are we evaluating credit now with that in mind with respect to private institutions, for example, that may seek to issue bonds? And if we don't, I know it's hard to anticipate things that have not yet happened, and we do not even know whether they will or the form they will take exactly. But we should keep it on our radar about keep it in mind that this may affect private institutions, both entities we've lent money to and those that we are looking to do in the future.
So the answer is yes, because one of the critical metrics that we look at are enrollments.
Right,
So
exactly.
Very important. And for those institutions or those credits that have a higher reliance on enrollments, that will be something that we'll have to give consideration to. But we have not explicitly said, Excelsior,
No, it would just be one of many factors when evaluating credit.
Yep, but enrollments are a critical issue for almost each and every one of these institutions.
Absolutely.
Right? So yes, absolutely.
And I think it's fair to say that enrollments will be affected at some schools. It's totally out of our control.
It's totally out of control. Right.
But on the deferred maintenance issue, I would also suggest that the state has had a huge deferred maintenance issue in front of it at the state university level. I have no idea about the CUNY, but at the state university level, on the campuses that I'm familiar with, there is an enormous backlog of work that has to be done to bring them up to current code and safety standards.
So
It's a universal higher education
Absolutely.
problem in New
Absolutely.
York. It's not
So-
just private.
No, you're absolutely right. But what we're highlighting is that, so SUNY is probably our second largest construction client between CUNY and SUNY. So clearly, we'd love to do even more. We'd love to do more. But recognizing that here's an opportunity for us to do some additional work in this space. We don't know. We may not be able to do it, but we do believe we're going to be very competitive in the residential hall. I mean, when we talked to Syracuse, they looked at our numbers. To McGrath gave his analysis, and they said that sounds spot on in terms of where we would be. But there are a lot of different dynamics associated with trying to secure that business. What we are looking to do is find ways to broaden relationships across the state and in some cases deepen other relationships. We recognize that there are some institutions who have come before this board who have their own construction corporation. They have enough wealth, enough assets to say we can go out there and build it. But we also recognize, given the pressures, and this is the big issue, because we've seen this in the healthcare space, right? In terms of the number of financings that we have had over time versus what we had last year. Big impact. We recognize that higher education will experience pressure and compression of balance sheets. And so these are issues that we're always concerned about. And when we go out, Portia and I have gone out and met with institutions. A lot of these institutions are very cutting edge in terms of how they're thinking about strategic partnerships with respect to, again, what is their core mission? Our core mission is to educate students, not run residential halls, not try to build all of these residential halls. We can get someone, we can get capital. So the opportunity set is today you can find capital and construction in a lot of places. And we're saying DASNY should be one of those. That's basically it.
Sorry, not to beat a dead horse, but Beryl was quite right. There was sort of a forward and a backward looking element of my question, and perhaps more interested in the backward looking. I mean, it's one thing about the opportunities going forward, but institutions that are already in the system, the extent to which the Excelsior program is going to impact revenue, how does that factor into the analysis of monitoring these institutions going forward? Is that systematized, or is that just?
I think it'll show up in the financial statements and in the information that we receive from the institutions, as Gerard was indicating. Enrollments are key, and your point is very well taken. A lot of the smaller institutions, and I think, Sandra, this is what you're alluding to, are very dependent, very on tuition and fees from the students, and you've seen that in various reports. But I think all of that will come through in the financial statements and the supporting operational data that we get from the institutions. So it is, we have to wait for that to take place and then get the reports. But it is very much something that I think Larry and his folks, will be very on top of as soon as they start that sort of monitoring and surveillance when the audits come in.
And with regard to those institutions that we are most closely monitoring, we too talk with them in the fall as their enrollments become more certain, even before they're finalized, as to how they're doing it and how they think that the year is going to play out.
Thank you. I also think, balance sheet, so changes on a balance sheet, and it's all contingent on what those changes are, do not necessarily immediately reflect that there's going to be a credit change. Okay, that's very important. Now, if there's an episodic change, yes, but I think one of the big challenges for higher education, just like healthcare and everyone else, is, again, when we talk to these institutions, they recognize a lot of the pressures, and that they have to begin to allocate amongst themselves. Where are they going to put more capital to work? Where are they going to pull capital away from? So these are already discussions that are taking place. This may accelerate some of that, I don't know. But we will certainly be on top of that.
And just to underscore Paul's point, I assume then you will be regularly reporting to us about where you see some issues, watch list type issues with these issues.
Certainly, as we detect changes, we will let you know, yes.
Any other questions on that? Yeah. But the long and short of that is that we think that there's an incredible opportunity, and we would really be remiss not to take advantage of the fact that we have incredible relationships across the state, and we should start knocking on doors to talk to these institutions and highlight the work that we do for a number of their peers, particularly the SUNY infrastructure, which is very important to us, our business. Let me move to another issue. On the 5th, so that would be April 5th, I took part in a panel at the Commercial Observers Development University Conference on Higher Education. There I discussed the role DASNY plays in expanding the economy across New York State, our procurement practices, our expansion of alternative project delivery methods, and the importance of preserving the full federal tax exemption of interest paid on municipal bonds. As I did on this panel, I have been emphasizing that tax-exempt municipal bonds are the primary financing tool for infrastructure projects across the country. This is true not only for governments, but also, as we just highlighted, for not-for-profit higher education and healthcare providers. I made the point here and elsewhere that reducing or eliminating the tax exemption would raise borrowing costs and cut down on opportunities for work for construction firms and others associated with the development industry. Another panel, the tax exemption was also part of a discussion on April 28th when I served as a panelist for the Privatizing Public Real Estate Infrastructure panel at the Real Estate Executive Council spring meeting. So we had to rebut a number of assumptions and conclusions that's associated with the title. So we here in New York State, we're not talking about privatizing, we're talking about strategic partnerships. And so we needed to distinguish that, which we thought was a very central proposition in terms of how we're looking at opportunities in public-private partnerships. There I outlined how DASNY is central to Governor Cuomo's efforts and how the work is executed in conjunction with the private sector, and explained how the low-cost, tax-exempt financing we provide to private colleges and universities such as Columbia University, Vaughn College, New York University, Cornell University is central to our businesses and their ability to achieve their capital needs. On the construction point, on April 24th, Governor Cuomo's office announced DASNY is partnering with CUNY on approximately $380 million in energy efficiency upgrades spread across 12 campuses. The work is part of the Sustainable CUNY Conserves program and helps fulfill the Governor's Executive Order 88 to reduce energy use in state buildings by 20%. The operational savings produced by the upgrades is being reinvested into campuses, into campus initiatives that benefit students while reducing environmental impact. The projects range from high efficiency lighting to the replacement of outdated heating and cooling equipment. I am also delighted to inform you that 2 DASNY projects will be recognized this month at the New York City Design Commission's annual awards for excellence in design. The new academic building at the Fashion Institute of Technology, a project in conjunction with the Department of Ed and SUNY, will receive an award of excellence. So we'll just highlight to our folks, Department of Education, congratulations. Job well done. And the Tottenville Shoreline Protection, a project in partnership with the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, Department of Transportation, and Parks and Recreation, will receive a special recognition. So we will certainly again applaud our construction division and our partners in transportation and parks and recreation. So we're very excited that we have received this recognition. That's my report, Mr. Chair. That's my report.
I know you're doing a lot in this area, but do you have any, notwithstanding all the information that you're imparting about the importance of tax deductibility of municipal bonds, it seems that there hasn't been a lot of understanding of that at the federal level, perhaps. And with many of the proposals or the talked about proposals eliminating not only the tax, either the tax deductibility of it or certainly the tax benefit as rates go down. Have we made plans as DASNY to account for the possible effect of this on us?
You said you made plans.
I mean, if indeed there is a limited or elimination of tax deductibility of municipal bonds, do you anticipate there being any effect on the number of bonds being issued by us? And if so, have we just put in the back of our mind how that might affect us?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. Because number one, while we're talking about this as an issue, I think states and municipal entities have been very aggressive in resisting this. And so right now, I think when we have gone to Washington to talk about this, and certainly the governor's office is very active on this, I think, the number that we've seen would be a spread of 7% in terms of decline. So I don't really know that. I'm sure that there's some analysis
Right.
on that. I just don't have that information.
And also, I'm just curious on the ongoing basis, are we seeing any movement, or I do note a tiny bit more flexibility moving from tax exempt to taxable bond issuance because of that, again, that potential limited deductibility of municipal bonds for tax purposes. So, I mean, are you detecting any movement to taxable bonds?
I think we've seen a number of institutions who have looked at sort of a combination financing, tax exempt and taxable bonds. As you'll recall, NYU has done that in the past, and I think that some of the issues that they've looked at as far as the taxable bonds are concerned are that to the extent that the spreads have been fairly compressed between taxable and tax exempt bonds. That's sort of one environment. As spreads widen out, that's another environment. But you're also raising the bigger issue of what if tax exemption goes away. But we have seen institutions that have looked to do both tax exempt and taxable financing for a number of reasons. One is that to the extent that there's a good amount of monitoring and tracking that has to happen on the tax exempt side because of private use issues. Institutions, I think, have found that particularly given the rapid change of pace in terms of how some of their buildings might be used, that in some instances it makes sense to issue a portion of their bonds taxably. And NYU has done that. As you know, you can issue bonds, these institutions can issue bonds taxably on their own, or they can come through us. We've seen institutions who've decided to come through us because there's a certain benefit if you issue bonds in a certain way. You can issue bonds taxably yourselves kind of into the corporate market with a corporate QSIP. You can do it through kind of with a muni QSIP. It offers certain structuring flexibility to the institutions. If you issue bonds more in the corporate structure, you're issuing bonds really with a bullet maturity. In the muni market, we've got serial bonds, so it allows you to issue bonds in a way that may be more advantageous for you as you're looking at your own budgeting. And the muni market has certain call provisions that are pretty standard, and I think that institutions often find that helpful. The notion that they can call their bonds, let's call it in 10 years or so, with a very in a very set and predetermined way. And I'll say that the market has been pretty good as far as really investors, muni investors in taxable bonds really, coming out and seeing really just a good response as far as the rates. The other thing that I would note, Donna and I have had this conversation, that when you issue taxable bonds through us, they're taxable on the federal level, but tax exempt state and local, so there's also some sort of marginal benefit from a rate perspective there. So yes, I think institutions are looking at those types of issues sort of in the current environment.
Thank you.
And we're promoting, and we are
Right,
promoting.
no, it sounds,
We are promoting.
yeah, it sounds like there are still many advantages to issuing through DASNY, even on the taxable
Right.
level. So that is, that's good to know and sort of put in the, put aside in case we need that.
No, we go around, so Portia and I spend a lot of time going around talking to institutions, and again, higher education and healthcare. When you talk about the whole virtualization of education at one level, the other aspect in higher education is, students want to know that they can get jobs, right? And universities or colleges want to know that they have great partners, strategic partners. They're bringing in a lot of these activities into their campuses, right? Private use. So give them the opportunity to structure public use and private use and make it very simple. We're doing that on that side. And certainly on the healthcare side, you're seeing, again, the nature of care is transformed. I mean, we've got one of these urgent care centers at a hospital, not a hospital, a hotel, a few blocks from here, that's offered by Mount Sinai. People are not necessarily always going to a hospital for care and treatment. And so they're bringing a lot of private use into these institutions. We want to partner with these institutions to help them think through how they look at their balance sheet and how they look at the activities inside of these larger pavilions. So we are saying that we support them.
Right. No, it's difficult to anticipate what shape future law will take. Certainly the healthcare is a perfect example of an ever-changing landscape. So,
Thank you. Any other questions for Gerard? Steve, may we have your report?
Sure. Behind tab 9 are the 3 construction division project reports. On the cover of the construction projects report for March 2017, the New York City Tech Voorhees Hall elevator replacement project is highlighted. The scope of the project was to replace 2 passenger elevators, 1 freight elevator in Voorhees Hall. The budget was $3.2 million. We started design in April of 2013 and completed in December of 2013. Van Dusen Associates, VBA, was our design consultant. Construction began in May of 15 and completed this March with Knightbridge as our general contractor. And STV was a construction manager helping us out with that one. Just some challenges with any elevator type project. It included the fact that Voorhees Hall is occupied, so we're taking a couple of cars offline. And just getting the elevator machinery to the roof of the building was a bit of a challenge as well. But it was completed in March. A couple of new projects that I wanted to highlight. We've had over $75 million in new projects added in March, including 2 at Queensborough Community College and 2 at Creedmoor Psych Center. At Queensborough, we have an $11.3 million cafeteria and kitchen project, as well as a performing arts ADA reconstruction project worth $9.5 million. And at Creedmoor, we're doing a window project at Building 73 with a value of $6 million, and a renovation to Building 70 with a value of $50 million. Construction expenditures, so the fiscal year ended in March. We came in at $634 million compared to March 16, where we were at $611 million. So we were $23 million to the plus this past fiscal year in expenditures. Just a few project and program updates. I'll start with NYCHA. We continue to advance the $100 million three-program initiative. On the security side, at this point, all 81 projects are in some stage of progress. 12 developments with projects were completed at this time. We have 21 in construction, 16 lighting projects that are either in a scoping priority mode or in design at this time. On the appliances, we have 7 developments completed out of 29. Another 13 are in some way, shape, or form progressing. And the quality of life projects, which are at 74 right now, we're moving through a scoping phase with the developments and moving into design on a number of those projects. Gozer, these projects continue to move through design, and we are managing and adjusting our resources in collaboration with Gozer. There'll be a big push toward construction on these projects later this year in 2018. On the SUNY side, the 35 summer projects start next week. Their total value is $30 million. And the 7 capital projects are continuing toward a July or August, and in one case, December completion date. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been to Albany, SUNY Albany, Oswego, Plattsburgh, and New Paltz. There's 4 capital projects, one at each of those colleges that are progressing. We anticipate these projects will complete in time for the fall semester in occupancy. I just wanted to give a brief update on Javits and Moynihan. As DASNY is the permitting authority, we continue with permitting-related activities, including design and code compliance review, issuing building permits, and associated field work. At this time, at the Javits Center, a 3-story transformer structure is underway, and we've been actively involved in reviewing the construction. The steel frame is up. The balance of that building will progress in another month or so. And at Moynihan, there's some early work on the train hall that we permitted. There's some work on the skylight trusses. There's some exploratory work with regard to demo and foundations. South Beach, our largest active construction project, continues to move forward in accordance with the project's baseline schedule. Building Package 1, the site work, and Building Package 2, foundations and shear walls, are complete or substantially complete, respectively. And Building Package 3, the steel erection, is well underway. At the Court Officers Training Academy, this project continues to make positive progress. Finishes are advancing in Building 1. MEP, window installation, and sheetrocking activities are progressing in Building 2, and window installation is progressing in Building 3. General contractor continues to work toward their June substantial completion date, although the DASNY management team anticipates the project will not meet that published June date. And lastly, at Brockport, the design-build res hall project, the 100% early package documents are with DASNY, with our upstate PDQA group. They're doing a design review on that. We anticipate that the building permit for that early package will be issued later this month, with construction commencing immediately thereafter. And just a couple of updates on the division overall. We're continuing to actively recruit across all departments within the division, and continuing to push on the technology side. We're looking at a couple of tablet applications for our field folks, continuing to update the construction division dashboard. There's a number of in-house development projects that are underway with regard to our processes, and we're going to let an announcement out for the replacement of contract manager, I think, later this month, next month, coming soon. That's our main project management software
The
app.
scope is ready to go out.
Are there questions for Steve?
Yes. This is probably a naive question, but what is the connection between all this angst over the Amtrak at Penn Station and the Moynihan Station? Is there an interconnection?
I don't know.
I was going to ask the same question, whether work that Amtrak will be doing this summer will impact the Moynihan Station project?
I don't think it does. I mean, we're really very early in the Moynihan work. So much so that, and a lot of our work is above the platform level. So the DASNY permitted work is in the train hall itself. A lot of Moynihan's work was a phase one piece that was the underground, track level work. So I don't see really an impact to the work we're permitting. And really the work that we're permitting is not going to get going in a big way for a little bit of time now.
The permitting work we're doing excludes the track work, which is permitted federally through Federal Department of Transportation and other agencies.
So, with all the concern that people have about change in Washington, is it conceivable that all of a sudden all this work on Moynihan could go to naught because they wouldn't permit the track level work that's required?
I actually thought a lot of the track level work was already through the hopper and done. That was an early phase that DASNY wasn't involved with. I mean, there will be some impact down low, but I think a majority of that work.
And the Amtrak work, I assume, is going to take precedent just because it really is an emergency situation.
Yes.
Regardless, and they anticipate it should be, knock wood, done before the end of the summer.
Yeah, and Moynihan is really not going to be
Right, and-
out of the gates at that time.
For those of us who have people in our office that leave the work every day not knowing when they will get home. It's horrible.
Dan, do you have any?
Yes.
The train shed work, they mostly front-loaded that, the work in the train shed that impacts Moynihan Station. Everybody knew that was the most difficult work because you need outages from Amtrak, and obviously the station is very heavily used. So that most of that has been taken care of. There's, as Steve mentioned, a little bit of foundation work to support the work up in the building. That'll come eventually. The only thing to add is, regardless of what happens with Amtrak and Penn Station, if any future work is going to be done on the larger station, Moynihan is pretty much essential because you've been through there every day. There's no swing space. So if you want to do anything to improve the rest of the building, you need this space first.
Yes.
Steve, I noticed that there are 4 projects that are listed as being dropped. Could you comment on those?
I knew you were going to ask that, so I
I
jotted down some notes. Let me start with SUNY Purchase. That's a project that was a DASNY project. We were looking to deliver that project in a CM at risk delivery method. We took it through design, but our design was not able to meet the $36 million budget. So the campus has pulled that project back and is looking to either use a foundation or another delivery method to try to keep it within their $36 million budget. So that's Purchase. Alfred, this was a project that originated as a new residence for the college president. Over time, the project actually started, foundations were done, and some of the frame was done. Over time, they rethought that, and they decided to make it a 50-bed residence hall, so just a very small res hall. And then they changed those plans again, and they're converting it into a lab for the students, a motor-type lab for the students. So it's seen 3 iterations, but it's not going to be built as it was originally intended or as it was intended when DASNY got involved the second time. It's going through a 3rd iteration.
And they're not asking us to be involved in the lab.
Well, on the SUNY campuses, we really can only work on the res halls and dining halls that support res halls. So this is more of an academic project now that would go to, I think they're actually doing it themselves or using SUCF to do it. The Medgar Evers project, the ventilation equipment project, I don't know the reason that this one was dropped, but I can find out for you. I'll get back to you on that one. As far as Sagamore goes, this was a project that's been on the books for a good long time, and OMH is really not doing a whole lot of work at Sagamore Psych Center out on Long Island at this time. So that project probably should have been pulled back a while ago, but wasn't.
Other questions for Steve? It's springtime. Let me say that every year, and I've had the opportunity to do so, I have encouraged the members this time of year to give Steve a call and to spend a few hours during a given day with somebody he will designate to show you a construction project. I think that it's such an integral part of what we do that it would obviously benefit each of you individually if you can find the time to do that. I've had that pleasure on several occasions. The designated hitter is somebody who is often the project manager or an assistant project manager, and they know the project inside out, so your time won't be wasted. There are projects that are easily accessible to all or most of you in your respective geographic areas, and I would recommend, again, springtime, that you think seriously about that and give Steve a call. All right. We're going to go to what is behind tab 8. Portia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 8, again, public finance reports. Since my last written report, we've placed one transaction, the Sunny Lawrence deal. We are actually in the market today with the school district pool transaction. Brief market update. As you can well imagine, headlines last week were focused on the Fed meeting, healthcare reform, the federal presidential election. While the Fed left rates unchanged last week, the focus now is on overall positive trends and what the expectation is for the June Fed meeting. The Fed funds futures are showing a 90% probability of a rate hike at that June 13th Fed meeting. Municipal supply this week is expected to total almost $10 billion, about $9.8 billion. Municipal bond funds have seen inflows last week and consecutively for the last 4 weeks. Since the April board meeting, 10-year and 30-year MMD rates have increased approximately 5 and 10 basis points respectively. The only other thing that I would note is included in your handouts on the table are bond sale summaries that include performance metrics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions for Portia? Hearing none, let me ask Mike Cusack if he has anything he wants to.
One friendly reminder, everyone's probably received the emails, but JCOPE filings are due on Monday the 15th. That's all I have to say. If you have any questions or want to talk, Debbie Dresser, Essex Officer, Monica Norris, Deputy, or me, we're available to help.
Do you get a heads up if we're delinquent?
You don't want to be delinquent.
No, I mean,
you'll get a heads up, but
yeah,
it won't be from staff.
I'm thinking that I filled one out months ago.
Yeah, that's true.
It's possible because it's a year-end up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how would we know? We just log into the JCOPE site?
If you log in, you'll see it.
You should have gotten a confirm back.
Yeah.
When you submit your form electronically, they'll send you an email back.
Yeah, you go to your account, it'll show everyone you ever filed.
Okay.
For back 5, 6 years.
Once a year?
Yeah.
Once a year.
Yes.
Months ago.
Yeah. We all received it several months ago.
No, I got it right after income.
Months ago.
Yeah, it comes right around the 15th of April.
Okay,
that's
so
right.
a month ago.
A month ago, like you sent
Yeah.
for the end of the year. Maybe I did it wrong.
Anybody who needs to take a
Everybody
note,
just check
a
or
reminder
call
note.
us.
You should
Thank
call
Didn't do that when
Debbie. You
reappointed
should
at that point?
speak to Debbie.
That's probably when you
Ethel sends out the reminder.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
You better check every chat.
Kim, do you have anything to add to the report that appears behind tab
She has a
7
friend
in the
on
book?
No, I don't.
Pressure.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have to have her check on something for me. She always does.
All right. May I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation proposed pending or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons.
So moved.
Yes.
Thank you, Sandra Darrell. Thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. The motion carries unanimously. We are in executive session. The record will reflect that we've just left an executive session in which no decisions were made other than to return to the public meeting. Are there any other matters to come before this board? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, thank you, Beryl. It's probably not according to Hoyle. Roberts probably wouldn't like this, but I put this comment off at the beginning of the meeting because I know how much you dislike it. It's a beautiful day. All in favor? Aye. None are opposed.
It's a little hazy.
Not as sunny as it is.
I'd like to take issue